All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going deep on something that I think a lot of English speakers, even advanced English speakers, kind of trip up on sometimes, and that is modal verbs.
Yes.
So we're talking about words like can and could and will and would, and these are those little words that just that kind of change the meaning of a sentence in very subtle ways.
Yeah, they're small but mighty.
They are small but mighty. Exactly. So like just off the top of my head, if I say I can meet tomorrow.
Right.
Versus I might meet tomorrow.
Totally different.
Those are two very different things, right?
Yes.
So in this deep dive, we're gonna unlock the secrets, or at least some of the secrets of modal verbs, with help from our expert. So you can use them like a pro.
Yeah, I think what's so cool about modal verbs is that they can reveal a lot about the speaker's perspective.
Yeah.
The situation, how they're feeling about it. They can express things like certainty or possibility or obligation, politeness. You can even express annoyance with if you use them in the right way.
Wow, that's pretty powerful for these little words.
Yeah, they are. They're powerful.
So, all right. So we've got this stack of articles and notes that you sent over to me.
Yes.
And one that really caught my eye is English Unlocked. How to use modal verbs. Can, could, will, would. Like a pro.
Oh, nice.
I mean, that seems like a good place to start, especially because it really does seem to focus on some of those most common modal verbs.
Yeah, absolutely. And they start out with a really good scenario that shows how powerful these little words can be. So imagine yourself in a job interview.
Okay.
And you want to express your ability to handle pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say, I can handle pressure, or I could handle pressure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I can handle pressure, to me at least, sounds a lot more confident, more direct.
Exactly. And that's the nuance that we're talking about.
Right?
Right.
Because if you use could in that situation, it might suggest that you're a little unsure or hesitant. Whereas can is like, no, I got this.
Right. I can do this.
This is not a problem.
And this is, speaking of can and could, I mean, this also reminds me of something else that this episode or this article points out, which is that, modal verbs don't change form based on the subject, right?
Yeah.
So it's always I can, he can, they can.
Right.
So for our listener out there, at least that's one less thing to have to worry about.
Right, exactly. And, unlike a lot of other verbs in English where you have to conjugate them for different subjects, modal verbs are just consistent.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
It's one less thing to worry about.
Right.
Okay, so we've got can for expressing like, a present ability, like I can do this right now. What about could? So this episode gets into some of the other really interesting ways to use could beyond just like a past ability.
Like I could run a mile in under 6 minutes, when I was younger.
Right, you were able to.
God, I can't do that now. So what else is there?
So yeah, it can express past ability, like you said. You were able to run a mile in under 6 minutes, but it can also be used for polite requests.
Okay.
So you could say, could you pass the salt, please?
Right.
It's a little softer than saying, can you pass the salt?
Yeah, it's a little softer. And that's, speaking of politeness, that's such a key element of communication, right?
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you're in some kind of professional setting, like let's say that job interview.
Exactly.
You don't want to come across as too demanding or presumptuous.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding these little nuances of modal verbs can be so, so useful.
Right.
Because, yeah, in certain contexts, using can to make a request can sound a little abrupt.
Yeah.
Whereas could is just a little more considerate.
Right. So for our listener who's prepping for that big job interview, mastering this difference between can and could be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. It can make a big difference.
So what else does this episode or this article highlight about could?
So it also mentions that you can use could for hypothetical situations. So you could say something like, if I had more time, I could travel the world.
Right.
And so it's not a definite plan.
Right.
But it's a possibility.
Yeah.
If that condition is met.
Yeah, it's conditional. It's like, oh, that'd be nice, but I can't.
Right.
Right. So could
Yeah.
is sort of, it's all those what ifs and possibilities. Whereas I guess can is more like, here and now.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So we've got can, we've got could. What about?
Oh, and I almost forgot there's one more interesting use of could that I wanted to mention.
Oh, okay.
which is you can use it to express annoyance or reproach.
Yeah.
So, like, imagine someone saying, "You could have told me you were coming."
Yeah.
It's not really about whether they were able to tell you.
Right. It's not about ability.
It's more about expressing like disappointment or frustration that they didn't.
Right. It's like, come on, you could have done that, you know?
Exactly.
Wow. So that's a subtle difference, but it definitely, it's got some sting to it.
It does. It does. And that's why I think it's important to pay attention to the context of the speaker's tone of voice.
Right, right. It's not just the words, it's how you say them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that can really influence how those modal verbs are interpreted.
Yeah. And also this is making me realize, it's almost like these modal verbs are kind of like little chameleons, right?
Uh-huh.
They can kind of change their meaning a little bit, depending on the situation.
Love that analogy.
So it's like you really have to listen carefully.
Yes.
And kind of read between the lines a little bit. Absolutely. And another interesting aspect of could is how it can convey a sense of doubt or uncertainty.
Okay.
So if you say, for example, it could rain later today,
Yeah.
you're not saying it definitely will.
Right.
You're saying there's a possibility.
Right. It's not definite.
Yeah. So again, it's all about those subtle cues.
Yeah. So for our listener, I think what we're getting at here is that these modal verbs, it's not just about grammar rules, right? It's about conveying meaning.
Absolutely.
And being able to navigate social situations effectively.
Yeah, being able to read those situations.
Yeah.
And choose the right word for the occasion.
Okay, so we've got can, could. I think it's time to move on to will and would.
Let's do it.
I don't know about you, but those are two that I always get mixed up.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about the future.
I understand. A lot of people struggle with that. But once you grasp the core difference, it becomes a lot easier.
Okay, so what's the core difference?
So will you want to think of as like a strong indicator of future actions or promises. It's like you're saying this is definitely going to happen. So if you say, I will call you later, that's a commitment.
Right. It's a promise. It's going to happen. Okay.
Sure about it?
Got it. So, okay. So will is when you're absolutely sure.
Yeah.
What about would?
Yeah.
When do we use that one, especially when we're talking about the future?
Okay. So would has a few different uses. One of them is for expressing hypothetical situations in the future.
Okay.
So you could say something like, if I won the lottery, I would travel the world.
Right.
So again, not a definite plan,
Right.
but something you would do if a certain condition were met.
Right. It's that what if scenario.
Exactly.
Right.
And then would can also be used for expressing future actions, but with a little bit of politeness or tentativeness.
Okay.
So you could say, would you like to join me for dinner tomorrow? It's not as forceful as saying, will you join me for dinner?
Right.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's soft. It's like a soft invitation.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's almost like would can sort of soften the tone of that future action. So it doesn't sound too, demanding or imposing.
Exactly. And that's why understanding modal verbs is so cool, because it allows you to really fine-tune your communication.
Right.
So you can, be polite, you can be certain, you can express possibilities.
Yeah. So many options. This is making me think about, how I use would, like when I'm making plans with friends, instead of saying like, we will go to the movies, which I don't know, that just sounds a little too strong to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I usually say something like, would you be up for going to the movies?
Right.
It just sounds more collaborative, less like I'm dictating the plan.
I think that's a perfect example of how would can create a more inclusive and collaborative tone, especially in social situations.
Especially when you're with friends.
Yeah.
You don't want to sound too bossy.
Exactly.
Okay, so this has been really insightful. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, I know.
We've covered can, could, will, would, and I feel like there's so much more to uncover.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole world of modal verbs out there.
Yeah, I know.
Fascinating.
And it's a little overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's good to be overwhelmed sometimes.
Oh, yeah. It means we're learning.
It means we're learning. So let's keep going.
Let's keep diving in.
Let's dive in.
All right. There's like a whole world of other modal verbs,
Yeah, I know.
waiting to be discovered, like shall, may, must, should, ought to.
I know it's a lot, but So let's try to tackle a few more, shall we? So this episode you sent to me, or this article you sent to me, also touches on should and ought to, which to me at least always seem kind of similar.
Yeah, they're very closely related.
Yeah,
they both express a sense of obligation or recommendation. But there is a little bit of a difference in tone.
Okay, so what's the difference?
So should is more common, and it carries kind of like a gentler suggestion.
Okay.
Like you should get some rest.
Right.
Whereas ought to is a little bit stronger. It's almost like a moral imperative.
Okay. So if someone says like you ought to apologize, it's like they're saying, you need to do this. It's the right thing to do.
Right. It's not just a suggestion. It's like,
not like just a suggestion.
This is what you should be doing.
Yeah. You've got to do this.
Yeah. And while both should and ought to can be used for advice, ought to is definitely less common in everyday conversation.
Got it. That's helpful to know, because I feel like I tend to overuse should. So maybe I'll try to sprinkle in a little ought to here and there when I really want to sound more authoritative, I guess.
Yeah, just be mindful of the context, because, ought to can sometimes come across as a little bit, I don't know, preachy, maybe. Right. If it's not used carefully.
Duly noted.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we dive into any more modals here, I think it would be good for our listener to kind of to be aware of some of those common mistakes that people make.
Oh yeah,
because this episode, it highlighted a few.
Yeah, absolutely. I think awareness is key.
Right.
To avoiding those common pitfalls that can trip us up, even if we understand the concepts.
So what's the first one that we should be careful of?
So one very common mistake is using can instead of could for polite requests. So remember, can is more direct. Could is a little softer. It's more polite. So instead of saying, can you open the window, it's better to say, could you open the window, please? Yeah, I can definitely see how that would make a difference, especially in formal situations. If you're talking to someone you don't know very well, or, exactly, you want to be extra polite. Yeah, it shows consideration. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good one to keep in mind. What else? What other mistakes do people make? So another common mistake is confusing will and would in hypothetical situations. So you wouldn't say, for example, I will go if I had time. Right. It should be, I would go if I had time. Right. Yeah. Because it's not a definite plan. It's not. Yeah. It's a conditional statement. Yeah. It's that what if, right? Exactly. So would creates that sense of possibility, whereas I guess will is more expressing certainty. Exactly. It's all about the context. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the simple but very important rule of using the base form of the verb after a modal. So you don't want to say I can to swim. Right. It's just I can swim. Right. Yeah. I can to swim. I've definitely heard people say that. Yeah, it's a common mistake. Okay. Yeah, so keep it clean, keep it simple. Exactly. So, speaking of simple, I remember this episode also mentioned something that we talked about earlier, which is that modal verbs don't change form based on the subject. Right. So it's always he can, she can, they can. You never say like he cans. Right, exactly. So it's easy to forget those little things when you're speaking. It is. And I think those are the small details that can really make or break your fluency. Yeah. So it's all about, paying attention to those patterns, practicing them until they become second nature. Right. So what does all of this mean for our listener? I mean, we've unpacked a lot about, can, could, will, would, should, ought to. I mean, it's a lot to absorb. It is a lot. But I think, the key takeaway is that modal verbs are incredibly powerful tools for adding nuance and precision to your language. Right. So, they can really help you express yourself more effectively in a wider range of situations. Right. From, casual conversations to formal presentations. It's like having, like a whole set of extra tools in your communication toolbox. Absolutely. And like any tool, it takes practice. Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. To master them. So, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Learn from them and just keep refining those skills. Absolutely. So this episode also includes some exercises to help kind of
put all of this knowledge into practice.
Oh, great.
And I thought it would be really helpful for our listener to kind of to hear some real life examples. Would you be up for trying a few?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. It's one thing to understand the concepts, but it's another thing to actually apply them, right?
Exactly. So, all right. So here's the first one. You're at a restaurant and you want to ask for the bill politely.
Okay.
Would you say, "Can I have the bill, please?" Or "Could I have the bill, please?"
Oh, definitely. Could I have the bill, please?
Okay.
Because it's a request. So using could just adds that extra politeness.
Perfect. Okay, let's try another one.
Right.
So you're giving advice to a friend who's feeling overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say, "You should take a break," or "You ought to take a break"?
Oh, that's a good one. I think in that case, either should or ought to could work.
Okay.
You should take a break. It's like, friendly advice.
Mm-hmm.
You ought to take a break. Is like it almost implies that it's really important for their well-being.
It's a little stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really depends on, how strongly you want to, kind of convey that advice.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Last one.
Okay.
So you're making a prediction about the weather. Would you say it will rain tomorrow, or it might rain tomorrow?
Well, unless I have a crystal ball, I'd probably say it might rain tomorrow.
Right.
Because you're expressing the possibility, but you're not stating it as a definite fact.
Exactly. So you aced all the practice questions.
Oh, good.
Now, for our listener, don't get discouraged if you didn't get them all right.
Yeah.
The point is to keep practicing.
Right.
Keep paying attention to how modal verbs are being used in different contexts.
Exactly. And the more you expose yourself to the language, the more intuitive it will become.
Yeah.
And pretty soon you'll be, using these verbs with confidence and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Just adding all these subtle shades of meaning to your speech and writing.
Right. Like a native speaker.
Yeah.
So this is giving me like a whole new appreciation for these little words. You know? They really are. It's like they're the spices that add depth and flavor to our language.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
I love that analogy. And just like with spices, it's about finding the right balance and using them in a way that really enhances the overall flavor.
So true. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from can, could to will, would to should, ought to. We've really explored a lot of these common modal verbs and their subtle nuances, right?
Yeah, we've made some good progress.
But we're not done yet.
No, we're not done yet.
There are a few more fascinating modals that we need to uncover here.
Yes, may and must are waiting in the wings.
Oh, may and must. All right,
with their own unique contributions to the world of modal verbs.
All right, so let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll tackle those too.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back, and I got to say, after going through all this stuff about modal verbs, I'm feeling like a newfound respect for these little words. They really do pack a punch.
Yeah.
When it comes to expressing those subtle shades of meaning.
They really do. It's amazing how much they can change the tone and the intention of a sentence.
Yeah, even if the main verb stays the same.
Yeah.
It's just these little modal verbs that are doing all the heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So speaking of shifting tones, we have two more modals to unpack here.
Okay.
May and must.
Let's do it.
So may, I always associate may with permission. Like asking, "May I go to the restroom?"
Right. Yeah, that's a very common use of may.
But what else can may do?
So you're right. May is often used for asking for permission, especially in formal settings.
Right.
It's a little more formal than can in that sense.
Okay.
But may can also be used to express possibility, similar to might.
Okay. So what's the difference between saying like it may rain tomorrow and it might rain tomorrow? do they convey different levels of certainty?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, while they both express possibility, may often suggest a slightly higher probability than might. It's a very subtle distinction.
Right.
But sometimes, yeah, those tiny nuances can really make a difference in how the message is perceived.
Yeah, I mean, this is making me think of that scene in that movie we were talking about where the character says, "I may be wrong, but."
Yeah.
And it just creates that sense of, like they're acknowledging the possibility that they could be mistaken.
Right.
But they're still, they're still presenting their viewpoint.
Exactly. May can be used to soften a statement.
Right.
Make it a little less assertive,
Right.
a little more open to discussion.
So for our listener, I mean, it really is. It's all about understanding the context and the subtle cues. Right. If someone uses may, they might be suggesting a higher probability than if they had used might.
Right.
Or they might just be trying to sound a little more polite or tentative.
Right, exactly.
It's like a linguistic dance.
Well, right, exactly.
You got to kind of be on your toes.
Yeah. It really is a delicate dance of choosing the right modal verb
Right.
to convey that meaning and just navigate, those social situations gracefully.
Right. All right, so speaking of conveying meaning, let's move on to must.
Okay.
Which, must to me always sounds very, very strong. Very authoritative.
Yeah, must expresses necessity.
Right.
Or obligation.
Right.
Often with a sense of urgency or importance.
Right. So if you say, like, I must finish this project by tomorrow, you're really conveying a strong sense of commitment, obligation, like, this has to happen.
Exactly. Like there's no room for negotiation.
Yeah. No room for negotiation. Must is very very definite.
Yeah, it leaves no doubt. That action is not optional.
Right.
And must can also be used to make strong deductions or inferences.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, you could say, the lights are on, so someone must be home.
Okay.
You're using must to express a logical conclusion based on, the evidence that you have.
Oh, okay. So it's like must is, it's kind of connecting the dots and creating a sense of certainty.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so powerful. It can convey necessity,
Right.
obligation,
Right.
logical deduction.
All in one little word.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From can and could to will and would to should and ought to may and must. I mean, we really have explored a whole spectrum.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey.
It has.
Through the world of modal verbs.
It has been a journey. And I hope our listener is feeling a little more empowered to use these verbs, with more confidence and precision.
I hope so too.
Because I know I am. I really feel like, this deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for the power of these modal verbs.
Yeah.
They really are the key to unlocking fluency and expressing yourself, with nuance and accuracy.
I couldn't agree more. And the best part is the learning doesn't have to stop here.
Yeah.
There's always more to explore, more subtle shades of meaning to uncover, more ways to play with these, versatile verbs.
Yeah, so true. So for our listener, I encourage you to keep practicing, keep experimenting, keep, paying attention to how these fascinating words are being used in real life conversations, in movies and books. You might be surprised how much they can enrich your understanding of the English language.
Absolutely. And remember, every step you take towards mastering modal verbs just brings you closer to fluency.
Yeah.
And it opens up a whole new world of linguistic expression.
That's a fantastic note to end on.
I think so too.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of modal verbs. We'll catch you next time for another adventure in language exploration.